All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Acoustics and Research, the Center for Acoustics Research and Education Fall Seminar Series. My name is Laura Klepper, and I'm CARE's Associate Director for Education. We are so excited to kick off our seminar series with our first featured speaker today, Dr. Susan E. Parks. The way that this is going to work is I'm going to first introduce Dr. Parks, and then she's going to hop right into her presentation. If you can please save your questions for the end. If you'd like, as she's speaking, you can put your questions in the chat, and I'm going to help moderate some of the questions at the end. And if there are any questions that we don't have enough time for, I know that Dr. Parks has offered to share her email at the end in case there's follow-up. So with that, let me introduce our first featured speaker. Dr. Parks is a professor in biology at Syracuse University, where she leads the Bioacoustics and Behavioral Ecology Lab. Prior to her position at Syracuse University, she was a senior research associate. Uh, excuse me, sorry, I lost my screen. A senior research associate and associate professor of ecology and acoustics at the Applied Research Laboratory at the Pennsylvania State University. Her primary research interests are the behavioral function and evolution of sound production in animals, their perceptual abilities, and the impact of noise on their ability to communicate. She has been involved in animal bioacoustic studies since 1995, first as an undergraduate working on whale acoustic census data and studying male frog calling behavior, then as a graduate student focusing on acoustic communication of the North Atlantic right whale. Her primary research focus has been on the endangered North Atlantic right whale, which she has studied for the past 26 years. Her awards during her career include the Office of Naval Research Young Investigator Award and a Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers from the White House. Dr. Parks is a member of the Acoustical Society of America, the Animal Behavior Society, and the Society for Marine Mammalogy. She earned her BA in biology from Cornell University and her PhD in biological oceanography from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution Joint Program in Oceanography. She has previously served on the Committee on Onshore Science and Assessment for Ocean Energy Management for the U.S. National Academy of Science, as chair of the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium, and as an associate editor for the journals Marine Mammal Science and Behavioral Ecology and Sociobiology. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Parks, who is going to be presenting Uncrewed Aerial Systems Advanced Study of Endangered Large Whale Acoustics. Dr. Parks.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to talk about some new research in my lab over the past 3 years. I actually came and gave a CARES seminar maybe 4 years ago, really focusing on North Atlantic right whale research that I've done in the past. And so for me, this is new and exciting things that we're doing in the lab that I wanted to share with everyone. So my research group at Syracuse University, the Bioacoustics and Behavioral Ecology Lab, really focuses on three main research areas: bioacoustics, where we study questions related to behavioral functions of sounds, noise compensation mechanisms, and individual recognition and hearing of individual species. Then in terms of the types of behaviors we're interested in behavioral ecology, we study questions related to mate choice, energy budgets, foraging behavior, mother-offspring interactions, and then ontogeny of both behaviors in terms of these behavioral ecology questions and in sound production. And then one of the focuses that we've really had in the lab from the very beginning is trying to look at these questions in endangered species. So how can we learn about these basic biology questions to inform conservation and management of endangered species? And so typically the data that we collect help inform detection of endangered species, identifying potential behavioral risks for conflict with human interactions, and then also potential impacts from stress. So I have definitely focused on baleen whales for all of my career. And I feel like this was sort of by accident to some extent that I ended up studying baleen whales just because I got stuck with this system because it's so fascinating. So they're long-lived mammalian species. So this is a photograph of a bowhead whale, which is arguably the longest-lived mammalian species that we know of, with individuals living in excess of 150 years. They have complex social and mating systems and sophisticated use of acoustics for communication. They have highly specialized feeding behavior. This is a photograph of a humpback whale engulfing prey in the Gulf of Maine. And the adaptations and behaviors of humpback whales and how they can work together to capture prey are really interesting to study. And fundamentally, I started working with North Atlantic right whales because there are these amazing long-term databases that have been put together by teams of scientists over decades, where we can identify individuals both in humpback whale and right whale populations. They have individual markings that are stable through time. And so with these photographic catalogs, we can actually keep track of individuals. We can know how they're related. We can know their age, their sex, just by taking a photograph of the animal. And so it was really interesting to study behavioral ecology with a free-ranging marine mammal where you actually knew all of that demographic data just by taking pictures. The other thing that's really struck me is the potential to answer questions with new tools. And so, from the very beginning of my research experiences as an undergrad, new technology was giving us new insight into the behaviors and the potential biology of these species. And so, I've always been really excited about that interface between engineering and biology and how new tools can open new doors and help us answer questions. On top of this, many of these species are highly endangered, either the species or separate populations, in large part due to human impacts from whaling, and then sort of ongoing accidental mortality from interactions with humans. And so it was appealing to study these species to try to address their conservation. And really, to be honest, as well, despite all of these things being fascinating to me, they're also bigger than a school bus. And so, even like the smallest baleen whale is as big as a school bus. And so, if you go out on the water in a boat and your study species is under your boat and you can see your study species in all directions around the boat, it's just really awe inspiring. And so, even though probably across my career, maybe I'm spending a month a year at interacting with the whales directly, and 11 months are behind the computer, just that small bit of time on the water with these species is pretty awe-inspiring. And then the other thing that really fascinated me as an undergraduate was that if you ask a question about basic ecology or biology of baleen whales, the answer is generally we don't know. Like, how fast does their heart beat? How deep can they dive? How long can they live? And the answers were almost always invariably we don't know. And so to an undergrad, I was like, this is awesome. This is really hard study species, and there are like limitless questions that we can answer. Occasionally I rue that approach of thinking because it's hard, I should do it. But I still am pretty fascinated by these guys as a study species. So I had the luck of starting at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution at a really sort of critical time in the development of suction cup archival biologging tags for studying marine mammals. So I started at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in 1998. People have been using suction cup tags on baleen whales since the early 1980s. Goodyear developed a suction cup time depth recorder that he deployed on North Atlantic right whales and humpback whales. In the late 90s, National Geographic had Critter Cam, which maybe you've seen in older documentaries, where these were sort of short-term suction cup tags that took video. And then in 1998, the first high-resolution archival acoustic and movement tags, or D tags, as you may have heard of them referred to before, were developed by Mark Johnson, an engineer at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, in collaboration with my PhD advisor, Peter Tyack. And so I was lucky in my first field season ever out on the water was deploying the first deployment of D tags on North Atlantic right whales in Cape Cod Bay. So I would say that my career has just sort of developed along with this technology, and I've sort of been along for the ride. D-tags have really proliferated the field of marine mammal ecology and study of acoustics since that time. This is showing sort of like a museum type selection of images with the very first version of the D-tags under the 1999 version 1. And then version 2 was the powerhouse of research for more than a decade. And then we've moved on to versions 3 and 4, which we're using now. And generally you can see that the tags have gotten smaller, so now they're about the size of my hand. And the ability for recording has increased from potential for like 12 to 18-hour recordings to now the chips themselves and the boards can record for up to 44 days. And we're really just sort of have a limitation in terms of battery life for this smaller tag where we can record about 4 days if we can keep the suction cups on the animal. More recently, in about 2015, there was a commercially available video tag called the CATS tag. So these sort of custom archival movement tags. And so the first deployment on humpback whales was in 2015. And so I've also been collaborating with groups working with these tags that are quite a bit bigger. They're maybe 2 or 3 times the size of a D tag, but still, compared to a baleen whale, relatively small. So the technology in terms of the tag side has been developing for quite a while, and it's been a fun part of my career to be part of this. So from the tags, we can look into the lives of these animals and get an idea of what they're doing subsurface. And so this plot, the top plot, is showing time of day in hours and minutes on the x-axis and depth in the y-axis, showing the dive profile of a humpback whale that was instrumented with one of these D tags. And so the gray line is the dive profile of the whale. And then the red dots indicate times that there were detections of particular vocalizations. In this particular study, it was a study of a paired burst vocalization, which was relatively low amplitude. And so we were able to look at the timing of that signal production. And then in the bottom panel, this is a dead reckon track of the movement and sensor data from the tag. So you can recreate the track of the whale. If you see down in the bottom, I'm not sure if my mouse is visible, but you can see this humpback whale down at the bottom of, and so this is a recreation of the track of the whale above. And so we get a lot of information in terms of orientation, position, environmental data, and acoustic data. And then we can sort of combine these data streams to try to interpret what the animals are doing subsurface. And so in this example, I'll play a clip from the time when this whale is shown in the diagram until it actually surfaces again, playing this paired burst sound. So having just the dive data or having just the acoustic data, it can be difficult to interpret what the whales are doing, but being able to put these together with precise timing allowed us to really piece together the timing that the whales started these sort of low amplitude pulses. When they ended them, they always ended them immediately before they did a side roll into the sediment. You could hear the sand in that recording. And so we were able to reconstruct that the use of this sound was really correlated with this behavioral state of subsurface feeding on the bottom in sandy habitats. And we also only ever detected the sounds when we knew the whale was with another whale. So we think that they're using it in some way to coordinate that foraging. But from the acoustics, all we could do is look at the timing and the relative orientation of the whale with the sound production. With video tags, you can actually get the sound, you can get the video, and you can actually see what the whales are doing if it's shallow enough to have light. And so this plot on the right is showing all the different sensor streams that you get from these tags. So the top plot is just that depth plot again with time on the x-axis and depth on the y. Then we can look at orientation, we can look at J, which is jerk, acceleration, and we can look at the estimated speed of the whale and a proxy for fluke stroke estimates in terms of the fluke rate on the bottom. So we can get all sorts of sensor data, but I'll play this video clip. This is the same behavior as the previous slide, but now we can see what the whales are actually doing when they get to the bottom to do this bottom feeding, because with the video tag, you can see the whale at the surface. We're looking at the back of the whale and little pieces of skin on the whale. And then they dive down to the bottom and it gets darker. This was a study that was conducted on Stellwagen Bank, and so it's not very deep. So the whale's only getting down to about a little more than 40 meters at the bottom. But as the whale is swimming down to the bottom, we can listen to the acoustic record. And again, similar to the last one, we don't really hear much in the way of sounds. But what you can see here is the whale's mouth is opening, and you can see other whales in the video frame. So we can actually look at when the whale's opening its mouth, how it's interacting with other whales subsurface, and then we can also look at how it's interacting with the seafloor. Here you see they roll on their side, they all open their mouths together, and then they're engulfing the prey as a group with really highly coordinated foraging behavior, which is really fascinating. And again, without the video data, unless we had all these whales tagged, we wouldn't actually be able to recreate this. And so there's really value in the subsurface movement data, in the acoustic data, and in the video data to try to understand what these animals are doing. And so this is sort of where our group is focusing on different endangered species to try to understand how they're using the habitat and what they're doing in terms of social coordination and behavior to understand risks. So for example, if you're worried about getting entangled in fishing gear, knowing that humpback whales are going all the way to the seafloor and sticking their mouth in the sand indicates that they could potentially interact with things that are on the bottom. So this is a figure from a paper that was actually written by Simone Vidisen, and it was just a really nice paper that was published in 2023 that summarizes really all of the information that you can get from these types of video and acoustic tags. Because we can get direct observation of predator-prey interactions. That last video clip I showed just had really focused on the whales, but you can see the prey in those video slides. And you can also get detailed context of the call types and the call rates of subsurface sound production. Also, these tags are often used for behavioral response studies where you can do a controlled exposure to an animal of a sound and you can see how they might respond subsurface and you can hear the sound and the recording that they are actually hearing. And then you can also look at these subsurface behaviors and behavioral interactions. And so I just wanted to set the stage for why deployment of these biologging acoustic tags can be so important for trying to understand the ecology of these species. So for the rest of the talk, I'm really going to try to highlight some of my collaborators that I work with in this project. And so this is Dr. Alex Shorter, who's an associate professor at the University of Michigan. And he has been someone I've been collaborating with since the early 2000s in terms of tag development. And so he works on the mechanical side of tag design in terms of the engineering and the planning for the tags. And so we like to work together, and I sort of fall under this group to the lower right of the users in the field that we test new technology. We give Alex feedback on things that might make the tag perform better or get better quality data. And then he works to improve this tag pool that's funded by a number of governmental funding agencies to make this tool available for people to rent for data collection in the field. And so this has been really a fun aspect of my research career, collaborating with engineers to try to make the technology better and not trying to do it all myself. And so it's really, really a fun collaboration. And the topic that I'm going to talk about today is really how do we move forward if we have tags that we want to deploy, how do we get them on animals, and what are the sort of engineering challenges that we have there. So for deploying these suction cup tags, there are really two methods that we've used since 1999. And so the first is shown on the left, and this is a cantilevered 50-foot pole. And so this would be something where we would have a good amount of reach past a small boat where we could deploy the suction cup tags on the back of a whale. This is actually a picture of me deploying a tag on a North Atlantic right whale. And I have to say, like, just think about trying to touch something with a 50-foot pole. Force perspective is really difficult. So even luckily they're as big as a whale because you could actually miss pretty easily guessing where the end of that pole is for tagging. And then on the right is a looped video showing a hand pole deployment of a suction cup tag on a North Atlantic right whale, where this is a much shorter tag pole. And so it's really a question of placement, getting the boat close to where the whale's going to surface, because you can't really, they have 3 dimensions that they can escape you in. And so you can't really chase a whale at the surface to get a tag on. You have to time it so that you end up in the right place at the right time. And this can be really challenging and time consuming. And so I would say that it is one of the biggest remaining challenges to getting tags on whales to collect enough data to answer some of the critical conservation questions that we have. So approach and successful tag attachment can be challenging. And so these are just 2 video clips of hand pole deployment of tags on fin whales. This is on Stellwagen Bank. And so this first one looks really easy. The boat comes up right next to the whale and they put the tag on. This second one, we have fin whales milling near the boat. The whales are really, really close. Alex Shorter is on the pole, and he comes up like a meter short, right? So you can spend hours getting to this position and then just miss by a meter, and it's like really frustrating. The tag's floating there in the water, so we have to get the tag out of the water and stop it from recording. And so this is one of the sort of challenges that we have, these super sophisticated tags that have really evolved over 25 years, and we're still deploying the tags the same way that we were deploying them in 1999. And so this is really the sort of whale tag data collection process. So first we have to locate the species. Over here, we have to get close with a vessel. Then we have to successfully get that tag on. This part can take all day or maybe never happen. And then we have to collect the data on the tag and track it, and then we have to get the tag back for data recovery. These are archival tags, and so they fall off of the whale, and then they have all of our precious data on them. And so the longer they stay on and the farther the whale goes, the more challenging it can be to get them back. But right now, these successful vessel approaches to get close enough to get the tag on are really the main limitation to data collection. And so, as I mentioned, right, like 25 years of advancement of the technology of the tags themselves and limited development of new methods for tag deployments. Other groups have used air rifles for sort of remote deployment of the suction cup tags, and primarily on species like orcas or whales that have sort of a broad side that you could launch them on. But with these flat-backed baleen whales, that may not be the best solution. So a potential solution was, I feel like it was kind of born of the pandemic. And so these uncrewed aerial systems, or another way that you may think about them, are drones. And I'll probably use that terminology interchangeably. So in 2021, because of restrictions in the field, we had a really small field team going out tagging humpback whales on Stellwagen Bank. I would say that it had been many years since I had spent a lot of time in the small boat doing the tagging, because I always would let new students go or new people in the field go experience that. And being on the boat again with these short pole deployments, realizing when you're putting the tag on the back of the whale, the fluke of the whale is next to or under your boat, made me think that, like, surely there must be a better way to do this, both for the whales and for the people. And so Dave Wiley, my long-term collaborator at Stellwagen Bank, reached out to Ian Kerr at Ocean Alliance that had been developing drones as a platform for baleen whale data collection. They had been primarily focused on photogrammetry and blow collection with their snotbot, but they had a lot of experience flying over whales and close to whales. And so we got together with a number of different collaborators, primarily led by Alex Shorter at University of Michigan, and then collaborators to try to develop a prototype system where what you see here is the drone system holding the tag with a little dropper. And so on the right, you see sort of details of this dropper. The D tag is really small, and so if you just drop it from a height, it's going to tumble. And so this fin is supposed to be for stabilization. And there was a little bit of paranoia about whether this orientation fin would sink, and so they also put a float on, which is just like a floating keychain. But so essentially, this whole package would be suspended under the drone and then fly over the whale and then release the whole package. The tag would stick to the whale, the orientation device would fall off and float in the water, and then we would just go pick that part up. And so in theory, that was what we were going to do. And the Ocean Alliance team was amazing in terms of development and testing on land with stationary objects, and then towing paddle boards, and then getting ballistic gel, and like doing all these off-angle tests. They did so much development into this system. And so it's been really wonderful to work with them. So this resulted in a paper that was published in 2023 that outlines the method and development. The first deployments were in Baja in Mexico. And so collaborating with Jorge Urban's group. And Chris Zadra is pictured here. He is the drone pilot for Ocean Alliance, and he is, arguably the best drone suction cup tagger in the world. After working with him for the past few years, he's been in high demand going for projects trying to improve the capabilities of tag deployment using this method. And so this is a figure from the paper showing the small boat that the tagging was taking place from in frame A. Frame B is showing where the whale they wanted to tag was relative to the boat. So it was about 1 kilometer away when they launched the drone. And then C is a picture of the drone hovering over a blue whale. And then D is the tag in mid-drop. And so the tag, the height for dropping the tag depends on the tag in question. And so in this particular example, it's a cat's tag, which is somewhat larger. So they're dropped a little bit lower. But you can drop the tag from a range of heights hovering over the whale, and then it will just stick to the back of the whale. And so I would say, too, that it was really interesting working with the Ocean Alliance team and with Chris Zadra, because when we were writing up this paper, he was talking about like how low his success was, right? That he only hit the whale with the tag successfully about 70% of the time, and he was really down about this. Whereas I was suggesting that really you should turn it around, and when we're going out with a small boat and we want to tag a whale, the probability of success if we say we want to tag that whale over there is very low. It's a somewhat opportunistic, and being able to tag whales in particular behavioral states that are more taggable, or particular individuals that allow a small vessel approach, in some degree probably bias our sample collection, because animals that are unapproachable with the boat or in a behavioral state we can't keep up with, we couldn't tag. So from my perspective, almost every animal that we say that we want to get a tag on with this technique, Chris was able to get a tag on. It might take a couple of tries, so the tag might miss the whale and hit the water, and so we'd have to go pick it up and do another drone launch. But from my perspective, this is just really game changing, because the boat doesn't need to be near the whale, the people don't need to be near the whale. So there's minimal disturbance and minimal risk with this process. And so all it takes is some battery power if you have to do multiple attempts. So for the rest of my talk today, I just want to go through 3 case studies where we've used this technique over the past 3 years with 3 endangered North Atlantic baleen whale species. So the sei whale, fin whale, and North Atlantic right whale. And so the sei whale, highly elusive. So if you haven't tried to work with these guys, I didn't even know how many of them were around until we started looking for them. Fin whales are super fast, so trying to tag a fin whale has been really challenging on the East Coast. We do have some tag deployments from Stellwagen Bank in the past, but often, particularly for video tags, we will have the tag stick to the whale, then they have a biofilm on them, and so you just watch the video as the tag slides down the length of the entire animal and falls off. So they're really challenging to get tags on. And then the North Atlantic right whale is highly vulnerable. This is a critically endangered species. And so data collection is really important and critical, but also for individual animals, we want to minimize any stress imposed from research efforts. And so having this type of approach where you don't need to get a boat close to the whale is really appealing for this species as well. So the first species I'm going to talk about are the North Atlantic sei whales. If you're not familiar with them, it's a large baleen whale. And there's really limited information about this species. So there are 3 separate stocks recognized in the North Atlantic Ocean, and the population that we're working with is the Nova Scotian stock in Massachusetts waters. It's an endangered species with estimates of about 6,000 individuals in the species in the North Atlantic. But this is a really rough estimate. There's a lot of uncertainty around this population estimate. And then there is also mortality from vessel collisions. There are a lot of instances of whales coming in on bulbous bows, and many of these whales disproportionately are sei whales. And then for the acoustic side of things, they have a stereotyped downswept call between about 80 and 35 hertz that's used for passive acoustic monitoring to distinguish and detect this species when it's present in an area. So the first tagging project, the first drone tagging project that we conducted as a group was with sei whales in 2022. And so these were also the first acoustic biologging tags deployed on sei whales in the North Atlantic. There had been one previous study with sei whales in the South Atlantic. So this is a really nice photo collected by Laura Howes from the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, showing the research vessel, the RV Auk, in the background with the drone platform hovering over a sei whale and the tag in mid-drop, falling to stick on the back of this whale. So Dana Cusano, who's a research assistant professor in my group, has really taken the lead with an analysis for this data set. And so this was a really fun project. So we were going out trying to put tags on sei whales, and we really just didn't know what we were going to find for this first project. We were planning to do big surveys of the region to try to find sei whales. And their very first day out on the water, we were leaving out of Scituate, Massachusetts, and less than 10 miles from the harbor, we found an aggregation of about 25 foraging sei whales. So this was like the easiest field project we'd ever had. We had 21 tags deployed in that first season, 4 by pole with the small vessel and 17 by the drone platform, with over 260 hours of data collected from these sei whales across these 3 tagging dates on April 25th, May 1st, and May 5th in 2022. And so you can see this map, some of these D tags have GPS. And so we were actually able to reconstruct the tracks of individuals that were foraging. And so the 3 tracks on the bottom are from those the first day in April, where we had 3 different animals tagged, and you can see they sort of stayed in the same region. And when I mentioned that it was close to shore in Scituate, you can see on this Google map, Scituate is right here. So it was pretty much as close as we could get, about halfway out to the sanctuary to Stellwagen Bank. And then the later tagging in May, we have an animal moving around in this habitat, but we did generally have animals staying in the same region, with tags staying on for up to a day at a time. So the really nice thing about the drones is that you have videos along with the tag deployment. So this is a tagging video of a sei whale in Massachusetts Bay from 2022, collected by Ocean Alliance. And so these are beautiful animals, and hopefully the video is coming through. But the tag falls and sticks to the animal, the dropper falls off. And then what I loved about this particular video clip is this animal was going into a foraging lunge. The tag went on and the animal did not interrupt its behavior. It continued its foraging lunge. And so if we had been approaching this animal with a boat, even if there was sort of minimal disruption, I think it would be unlikely that the animal would not have interrupted its foraging behavior due to the close proximity of a vessel. And so we're able to get really nice imagery from this approach for tagging. And this is also tagging with a CATS tag, a video tag, just to see what the ride is like from the drone from the tag perspective. So the drone is approaching the whale, you can see it right in front, and then drops onto the whale and drops below the surface. This video clip I particularly like because one of the really distinguishing characteristics we found in this foraging aggregation is these whales were staying very close to the surface the entire time. And so you can actually see another whale off to the left, that sort of white shadow. But you can also see the reflection of the surface. This whale was only a few meters below the surface for most of the tag deployment. And so with the video tags, it's very easy to see associations with other animals, them moving through this sort of dense prey patch. And staying very close to the surface for almost the entire time. So the tags were really interesting because they revealed new low amplitude call types from sei whales. And so this downsweep call that I talked about before from about 80 hertz to about 35 hertz is the one that's used for focal ID and PAM detection. And so I'll just play one of those clips. Depending on your speakers, you may not have heard anything there, but they're relatively high amplitude signals, but very low frequency. So my apologies if they didn't pick up on your speakers because I was playing it in real time. But we also had these lower amplitude pulsed calls that were produced by individual whales. So you can hear that thumping sound. I mean, it almost sounds like distant pile driving or some other impulsive sound. But these were sounds that were being produced by individual whales, and we have good confirmation of that, both from the on-animal acoustics and also the accelerometer data picked up the signals in the tags. And so what we found is that the acoustic repertoire of the sei whales do consist of this downsweep call, and so that seemed to be produced across all the animals that we were studying. But they also had a lot more sound types, generally low amplitude, that they were producing while they were foraging. So this is a dive profile from one of the sei whales that we tagged in 2022. And so first I'll start out by pointing this is time of day. And so the tag went on a little before noon and it came off around 6 a.m. the next day. So this is looking at the entire afternoon and evening and overnight period for this tag deployment. The other thing I'll point out is that the y-axis is depth, and what you will notice is that almost all of the time for this entire deployment, this animal was at less than 3 meters depth. And so both day and night, this animal was staying very close to the surface. There were some exploratory dives, so perfectly capable of diving. Most likely because of the prey distribution, they were staying in very shallow water, and we saw evidence of foraging both day and night. The stars that are colored on here are just showing the timing of different types of call types. The knocks are the ones that I just played for you, and then there are also lower amplitude pulse trains PT1 and PT2 that are described in the Kusano et al. Paper in JASA that was published in 2023. And so we see that there are bouts of calling. Often these are associated with some of these excursion dives, and so really interesting sort of sound production. But the number of downswept calls for focal ID by this animal were 0. So this animal didn't produce any of those sort of stereotypical downswept calls. So we can't necessarily count on a call rate for every individual to produce those calls. But again, the diving aspect of this was what was most concerning to us, that these animals were spending both day and night in this particular habitat at this time of year, likely because of prey, just below the surface. So the next case study that I want to talk about are North Atlantic fin whales. So these are the second largest baleen whales. It's an endangered species with fewer than 7,000 individuals in the North Atlantic. They also have a habitat in high human use areas. You'll find a lot of them just off of Long Island in the New York Bight, and off of Boston and Massachusetts. And they also have challenges with mortality from vessel collisions and entanglement in fishing gear. They have a stereotyped frequency modulated 1-second sweep, often referred to as 20 Hz pulses that are, they span a range a little bit higher and lower than that, but they're centered around 20 Hz. And this is sort of the stereotypical sound that's used for passive acoustic monitoring for this species in the North Atlantic. So these data were collected as part of the Project WOW, so Wildlife and Offshore Wind, which is led by Duke University. Doug Nowacek is the PI. And this first cruise was on the Song of the Whale for 7 days in 2023. And so this is a totally different platform. So deployment of tag using UAS system off of a sailboat offshore. And so this was for tagging of fin whales during wind farm construction south of Cape Cod. And so this is a map showing the area that the cruise took place in 2023, and the colored maps are different wind farm lease sites. And so there was some construction taking place in Vineyard Wind and then also in South Fork. And so we had different opportunities to try to investigate the impacts of construction on behavior of some of these large whales. So this is, I just love the video, so I really apologize if it's not coming through for you. But this is a deployment of tags on fin whales, which after decades of trying to get them on using a small boat is just really satisfying. So the drone is able to hover over the whales, then when they come up to the surface, the tag is dropped and falls onto the back of the whale. And then with the fin whales, we did often see these flippers going out after the tag deployment, but then they would continue with their behavior after the tag was deployed. And again, the sort of, tag eye view of going on the whale. These whales spent more time away from the surface, and so after the tag goes on, that we actually have them moving away from the surface a little bit faster. So in 2023, over that 1 week of field work, we had 28 tags deployed. And so just for perspective, we probably have a total of about 17 fin whale tags from sort of tagging attempts over more than a decade in Stellwagen Bank. So it's just very difficult to get tags on fin whales when they're moving quickly. And so the opportunity, is really, really rare. So getting 28 tags deployed was really impressive. And again, all thanks to Chris Zadra for being the pilot again for these tag deployments. I also want to highlight the minimum tag deployment of 34 seconds. So I mentioned before biofilms on fin whales in this habitat in the summer. So we saw this as well with the drone deployments, that the tags would stick to the back of the whale and then just slide down the body and fall off. And so after a storm came through, we had much better success with the sticking of the suction cups. But that's really something that I don't think has anything to do with the UAS deployment, because we had that problem as well with the pole deployment with these whales. But we had 13 tags that stayed on for an hour, more than an hour, with a sort of an average tag attachment of those tags of about 7.3 hours. And Dana Adcock is a PhD candidate in my lab, and she's heading up this analysis of this tag data set. And so from the acoustic tagging, only 5 of those 13 whales had calls from the tagged whale. And so this is one thing to think about that I think is really interesting, and she'll be presenting this at the Society of Marine Mammalogy conference next month. So the call rates of individual whales were often low. She has examples of up to 15 hours with no focal calls. And so individual fin whales aren't always making sound. She found a range of different calls, which has been really interesting to look at. This has been described on the West Coast of 40 hertz calls associated with foraging behavior. But also, she had a range of calls that were at higher in frequency, 120 hertz, and other call types as well. And so it's pretty interesting. The call types, the calling behavior was more frequent during periods of active foraging, and they were foraging mostly during the day. And so we did really see sort of diel trends in the dive behavior of these animals. Again, we don't have prey data with these tags, which is something that I think is really important to integrate in the future, because where the animals are in the water column is really linked to what the prey are doing during the foraging season. And then for the fin whale, during the day with foraging, this is another dive profile looking at time on the x-axis and depth on the y-axis, with the red circles indicating times when calls occurred. And so what you note here is that we're seeing a lot of calling at depth, and often sort of at the end of foraging dives after lunges. And so Dana's really investigating the function of these calls and how it might function for mediating social interactions during foraging. So sort of really interesting. You're not getting calls regularly across the entire deployment. This is showing a few hours of the deployments, and you have, more than an hour and a half with no calls at all, and then a couple of bouts of calling associated with different behaviors. Another advantage of using this UAS system is the ability to do photo ID from the air. And so for the fin whales, this was really interesting. They have unique chevron patterns on their back. And so Dana was able to do intermatching of drone images to identify 20 unique individuals of the 28 tag deployments. And three of these individuals were matched to Gulf of Maine fin whale catalog data. We had 7 individuals that were tagged multiple times, mostly across different days, or if they had a tag that didn't stay on for very long. The UAS system can also be used with calibrated altimeter data to do estimates of size of the animals that we're studying. And so not only are we getting tag deployment, we can also collect ancillary data. And so this part has been really exciting, being able to get imagery of the full body to do estimates of body condition and body size using this platform is sort of this add-on, right? Like we don't get any of this information from a carbon fiber pole. And so it's not just a tag deployment tool, it's also a data collection tool that gets us a lot more information about the animals. And this is something that's widely used by a number of groups and not really necessarily relevant to the acoustics part of this talk. But I do want to highlight Liz Burgess from the New England Aquarium and Danielle Dillon have been piloting doing hormone assays from blows collected with this platform. And so again, using SnotBot from Ocean Alliance, this video shows the drone flying in for these fin whales on this cruise and just essentially getting sprayed by the exhalation of the whale. There's a tag on that whale in the lead and the pair that it's with. And so we were able to get biological samples as well. And interestingly, the suction cups on these tags, we don't always see skin tissue when we recover the tags, but we have been taking swabs of them regularly for the past few years. And with all the advances of PCR, we are actually able to successfully get sex of individual animals from just the really minuscule skin samples that we're getting in the suction cups as we get the tags back. And so you can see the exhalation on these petri dishes that are then saved and processed by the New England Aquarium as part of the WOW project. So the last case study I want to talk about before I wrap up are North Atlantic right whales. So again, another large baleen whale. This is a critically endangered species. So for the sei whales and fin whales, I was talking about thousands of animals. For North Atlantic right whales, I'm talking about fewer than 400 individuals in the entire species. They're undergoing an unusual mortality event and have had really high mortality over the past 7 years. And so they have primarily conflicts with vessel collisions and entanglement in fishing gear as the known causes of mortality. And they have a stereotyped contact call or up call that's used for passive acoustic monitoring. And so this is something that I've worked a lot on over the past 2 decades. So this particular study, I'm just going to talk about briefly because it wasn't super successful in terms of data collection, but I think it gave us a lot of really interesting insights. And so this was a tagging project in collaboration with Stellweg and Bank National Marine Sanctuary, led by Dave Wiley, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Ocean Alliance, and IFAW. In March of 2024, so just this past spring. And the field crew was there and ready for a couple of weeks of data collection, and there were only 2 days that were suitable for going out in the water. For a variety of reasons, we just don't really want to have vessels out in the water if it's too rough to see the right whales. And also the UAS platform does have limitations in terms of wind speed that it can be safely flown in. So this was actually the research vessel that we used, the Miss Emily, which is a chartered fishing vessel. And so the platforms that you can use this drone deployment of the tags gives a lot of versatility. You don't have to have a dedicated tagging platform vessel that can get close to the whales. Any boat that can safely be out on the water can be used as the platform for tagging. And so on those 2 days of suitable weather, 3 tags were deployed. And so this is a supremely boring video, but this is the challenge of tagging right whales in Cape Cod Bay in the spring. So they are often just subsurface. So if you can sort of see a shape shifting below the surface of the water here, right whales can stay down for a very long time, skimming just beneath the surface. So what you can see here are some of the callosities on the head of a right whale as he's just below the surface. And so with the UAS system, Chris was able to follow the whales for extended periods of time and just wait for that, the 1 or 2 breaths that they would come up to the surface for the tag to be deployed. And this is something that we've seen in the past with trying to do small boat tagging of whales in this habitat as well, as you can see them just subsurface and you can follow them to be in position to tag, but you can be waiting for many, many minutes. And so this is, like I said, a supremely boring video that I've already pared down so that we can just get to the chase where the animal is tagged at the end of this section where he comes up to the surface. But this also highlights the challenge for conservation for this species, that they can be just below the surface at risk of vessel collisions, and they can be there for most of the day and you just can't see them. And so the tag goes on and the whale goes back to open mouth feeding immediately. And so this is again really highlighting that nobody had to be close to this whale other than the UAS hovering over the top of it to get the data. The other advantage for North Atlantic right whales that's well known is that you can do photo ID from callosity patterns on their head. And so the drone images for any animal that was just subsurface or broke the surface could rapidly collect photo ID images, as seen here in these 2 slides or 2 images. This is something that I talked about in the last time I gave a talk. Right whales are often really, really quiet. So these were short tag attachments. They only lasted from a little under 3 hours to 4.5 hours. 2 were on females, 1 adult and 1 juvenile, and the 2 females had very low call rates of less than 1 call per hour on their tags. And then we tagged 1 adult male, and he produced 16 upcalls in bouts, generally of 1 to 3 upcalls, with a call rate of about 5.7 calls per hour. And so this is just a quick recording off of his of the 2nd upcall in this series. So these uncrewed aerial systems really offer the opportunity to increase the efficiency of data collection. So the tag data recovery and the data collection and tracking is really now our new limiting step. Because the tag deployment problem is really improved a lot with using this remote platform. So it still takes patience. It definitely takes skill. I can't say enough how accomplished a pilot Chris Zadra is, but there are other teams that are being trained and using this approach to try to apply it. And my hope is that in a few years, this will become the new standard for deploying these suction cup tags in the future. And so I just want to try to end with this video to just highlight the fact that, using these platforms really solve one of the major challenges of people being out on the ocean doing research, because we were often really limited by what our boats could do. And so being able to approach the whales safely at sea in different sea conditions. And this is an example of a sequence where the whales were spotted. The drone goes over to find the whales, checks their orientation, lines up for the tag deployment, is able to get photo ID shots of the chevron, and then get into position for tagging the whale. And this is all taking place in a single surfacing event of this animal. And so it just really cuts down from, I think in this deployment, it was maybe under a minute and a half from launch of the drone until the tag was deployed, which is just really, really exciting for those of us that are trying to get these data to help with the conservation for these whales. So the future research directions that we have, my wish list. I mean, I'm always wanting more and want things to work better. So again, still wanting to keep improving the technology to increase the data availability from these large whales to address conservation concerns. I'd like to expand these studies to additional endangered species in the North Atlantic. I focus on baleen whales. I think that some of the smaller odontocetes will be challenging, but potentially not impossible to tag with this method. And so I'm just curious to see how many species we can sort of use this technology to do data collection in a more or a less invasive or disturbing way. And then generally, what we're trying to do now that we're getting is trying to link the acoustics and the behavior bands for improved conservation. We can actually tell you how many animals are present, if they're socially interacting, if they're actively foraging, so you have a sense of where they are in the water column. This will really only improve the power of what we can do with passive acoustic monitoring and PAM. And so I think that this is critically important for helping conservation for these species. And so with that, I just want to acknowledge all my collaborators. This is definitely the work of a huge team of people that have spent a lot of time and effort getting the data I just talked about today. And I really value all of them and have enjoyed working with them all, for those of you that are here. And then also the funding. So the work that I'm talking about today was funded by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Department of Energy, Navy Living Marine Resources, NOAA, Office of Naval Research, Ørsted Offshore Wind, and the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And all of the data that I talked about today were collected under permits from the National Marine Fisheries Service with IACUC approval from Syracuse University. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Wow, thank you so much, Susan. I know we're all virtually giving applauses. Yeah, I can hear the people in person clapping. You know, learning about the D tags I remember learning about that as an early undergrad, and that's actually what got me interested in the field of bioacoustics. And I had the opportunity to participate in some tagging during graduate school. And I don't even think you began to just hint at how difficult it actually is with those carbon fiber poles. So it's absolutely fascinating to see this new approach that you've put together. Those videos are just jaw-dropping in what you can do, and I think highlighting on the additional what you can do with the biometrics and everything. I think it's just fascinating. So that's lovely. So let's hop into some questions. So the first question comes from, and I actually know that I've only seen Hillary's name written down, so I'm probably going to mispronounce it. Sorry, Hillary. Hillary Cates Varghese, I believe, from Boehm, that says, as you showed all the things you were learning about baleen whale behavior, it reminded me of a publication, Trapped Within the Wall of Sound, a possible mechanism for the bubble nets of humpback whales by Timothy Layton. It has been hypothesized that the trumpeting calls emitted by whales when they produce these nets may become trapped within the bubble wall, generating high intensities there. This article shows that under certain insonification conditions, sound can be concentrated within the wall of the net, leaving the inside of the cylinder where the fish congregate almost silent. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this phenomenon. Is this something you have observed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would start by saying that humpbacks are I still say I'm a right whale biologist and not a humpback biologist, despite having studied humpback whales now for like 16 years, because they're just so difficult, because they do so many different things. So the really interesting sort of like cries that are really common in the North Pacific, we had not previously actually detected those in Stellwagen Bank. This year they were feeding on menhaden and lunging out of the water looking like all those documentaries that you see in Alaska, and we were starting to get some of those cries. But definitely the bubble nets that we were seeing for feeding on sand lance, we weren't getting those cries. We get some of these grunts, but it's it seems to be linked to the number of animals in the group, and it seems also more of sort of like an excitement level rather than a prey herding. But again, like the quiet paired burst sound that I played, some of the early hypotheses were that it could have been for driving the fish out of the sand. I don't know why a sand lance would come out of the sand if it hears something, but um, I think that it definitely, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of variety of sounds that humpback whales make. And so I think there's a lot of potential to explore how their different prey types respond. But it's also really fascinating across the years when they move from sand lance to herring to menhaden in terms of feeding. The acoustic repertoire and the foraging technique that the animal uses changes. And so I think that there's definitely something tied to that.
Great, thank you. The next question comes from, I believe it's Rui Prieto saying, Chris is a highly specialized pilot. I know him and he is up there with competition pilots. He actually does or used to do drone racing. Ooh, that sounds fun. As such, do you think that drone tagging is limited to having highly skilled pilots in the team, or is it something that is easily learned?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's not something easily learned, but I also know that Chris is not the only one who has now done it, right? Like he is, I think, a really gifted pilot. I totally agree. But he's been great, and Ocean Alliance has been great in trying to train additional pilots and talking about the techniques that Chris has developed to do this. And so I know that there are other groups that are building up this capability. And I think that with any skill, right, it's going to depend on the ability of the individual to practice. But that's the same for the pole tagging as well, right? Like we could hand anyone the pole, but if you don't have the timing right, you're not going to get a tag on the whale, no matter how good the boat driver is. So I think it's just a matter of time. But I think that from my perspective, even if someone misses 15 times with the drone, you can on the 16th time tag the whale and no one had to get close to the whale, and it's still going to take less time than getting a boat close to the whale. And you also will be able to put tags on animals that are, for example, injured or potentially entangled without having to get close to them. So it just really frees up what we're able to do.
Great, thank you. The next question is about the tagging itself and the drones. So, since these drones and tags are electronic, have you found any issues with the sound and the visuals themselves? And with the quality of the video, was it ever blurry or was the audio too faint to hear? And did you ever have them stop working due to any water damage?
Yeah, so there are a couple things, right? So the we're not using the audio or the video when the tags are on the drones because definitely it is a very noisy proposition, right? Hearing I had all those drone videos muted for a reason. But for the tags themselves that go on the whale, there's been a lot of engineering effort that these are really encapsulated. There's not possibility for water intrusion because they're completely enclosed and embedded with the data inside. And so we haven't had issues with that per se with either of these tag types because they're really designed to go underwater, and they're kind of over designed for baleen whales in Massachusetts Bay because they're designed to go on like sperm whales diving to 1,500 meters, and we've got like a fin whale going to 30 meters with them, so it's not too bad.
Great. Another follow-up question about the tags. I'm kind of hopping around for those of you following the chat. I'm trying to get a nice diversity here. How many times will these whales surface in an hour or a day? Does it vary with species? And can the cups and the tags stick on the whale under the water, or is it only when they're above the water that you can get that suction?
Yeah, it's a good question. Definitely the number of times the animal surfaces completely depends on the species, but it also depends on the species and the time of year and what they're doing. So, like the right whale example that like all that bit of boring video I made you watch, right whales in Cape Cod Bay do not surface very much because they're very shallow and they're actively foraging, and maybe you would get two or three surfacings an hour, and like in other habitats they could be spending most of their time at or near the surface. So it depends on the species and their behavior. For the suction cups, when we're trying to get them on, we're getting them on when the back is exposed. I think that you could stick them to the whale subsurface, like we definitely with a pole. If you have the tag and you hit the whale, under the water with the pole, the tags can stick. These suction cups are. Everyone is always like, how can you get a tag on with a suction cup without a lot of force? And I like bring the tag over to them and they stick it to themselves because they're just very good suction cups. In fact, someone got one stuck to their head once. but they generally will want to put them on when the skin is exposed to air. That helps with building up that vacuum, but it's more the forces of the water. Trying to push something onto a whale with flowing water over its body is the bigger challenge.
All right, the next question comes from John Buck. Is there any evidence of the function of the fin whale calls as they prepare to surface? Could they be signaling successful foraging bouts to other whales as they prepare to surface?
Yeah, well, that's definitely a hypothesis that Dana can look at. I think there have been previous studies that have associated some of these call types with, good prey patches. And so, the hypothesis is already sort of out there that they're using these signals to advertise a good resource, either for attracting mates to that good resource or just advertising the prey patch itself. But we're sort of at early stages for the function of those signals with the North Atlantic population.
All right, I think we're almost getting to the end of questions here. People keep putting in a lot of questions, which is great. So Kathy Vignes Raposa asks, what is the range and speed of the drones? So amazing. And I agree.
Okay, I'll defer to Chris. I know he can go fast. Um, I mean, I think at least 30 miles an hour, but I feel like they can go much faster. I'm sure there are people in the audience that have a better sense of that capability than I do.
Great. Um, I'm assuming Chris is not on here to answer. I don't see Chris's name. No,
Can I
okay.
ask a question in the room?
Sorry, Jen, did you say something?
Yeah, can ask a question from in the room?
Sure.
I was just curious with sei whales. Do males and females make those down sweeps?
Yeah, yeah.
Ah,
As far as we
okay.
can tell, yeah. I mean, we still have limited sex data from the sei whales, and so I didn't get into that. I mean, I talked about how wonderful humpbacks and right whales are because we know everything about them by just taking a picture. For fin whales and sei whales, it's kind of like it's a whale. And then we hope a catalog has maybe sexed them before, or we get enough skin in the suction cup. So I have to go back and confirm with the publication, but I believe that pretty much every animal we tagged, male or female, we were getting those down sweeps.
That's cool. There's so much not known about sei whales, so I'm super excited to see that. Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, I think unless there's another question from the UNH crew, I think we have just one last question, which is from the chat, from Amanda Babin, saying the humpback whales doing the bottom side rolling foraging behavior show that some individuals turn to their left. My understanding is that most cetacean feeding happens on their right. Do you think turning to the left is more common with this foraging type? And do you know of any other behaviors where left-handedness is shown, or have you observed individual preference in handedness?
Yeah, so interestingly, there was a paper that was published early on from the Stellwagen Bank humpback whale tagging that showed that there is, sort of like lateralization in the behavior of humpback whales, and the proportion of animals that are preferentially right flippered versus left flippered is about the same proportion as humans. And so that was really interesting, right? So there are left flippered humpback whales. But I have a master student right now who's trying to look at more of our tag data to look across species. And so, like sei whales, for example, they roll on their sides for foraging, and they seem super ambidextrous. They'll roll left, then they'll roll right, they'll roll left, and then right. Fin whales, we're seeing more lateralization, and so it's interesting to think about whether it's a body size or a prey handling question that would drive selection for that. So, yeah, great question.
Wow, I think that might be my fun fact of the day that I picked up with the left-handed and right-handed. Well, Susan, thank you so much for sharing this amazing work with us and for answering all of our questions and for being our first featured speaker for the CARE seminar series. A reminder to everybody that we have two more speakers. Yes, we're getting lots of applause. Two more speakers, so you can check your email for the schedules of those. And again, thank you again, Susan. We can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your science with us.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed it.
Have a great day,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you, Susan.